It's more important than ever for brands to be human, to have a spark, to have a soul.
If you're not talking to customers, you shouldn't call yourself a marketer.
Understanding their humor is like one of the deepest forms of knowing your buyer.
What a data tells a story that's gotta be told. It's the art and the science, get the numbers right. Brandformance!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. Today we're joined by Sylvia LePoidevin, the outgoing CMO at Kanji, a platform specializing in Apple device management for enterprises. Now, Sylvia was the first marketing hire at Kanji and has been there for 6 years and has been instrumental in scaling the company to a valuation just shy of $1 billion. So let's find out how Sylvia thinks about marketing and going from the first marketing hire to a CMO of $1 billion company. Sylvia, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's been a long time coming. I first heard of you and heard you speak on Dave's podcast, Dave Gerhardt, and you know, I was an immediate fan of the content that you were putting out. So I've been following you along for a long time, and I'm glad we're getting a chance to go deep into all things Kanji. So before we even get into sort of the heavy material that I'm sure we're going to get into, the first question I have for you is there a brand that you are jealous of right now in terms of the marketing that they're putting out? What comes to mind?
I have to say Clay, even though most people will probably say Clay right now. But what I love about what they've done, the reason I'm so excited about it is because they've done this incredible job at ecosystem marketing. Ecosystem marketing is a term I heard from Emily Kramer, if you know her. But just a great term for this concept of can you turn, whether it's your user base or a partner ecosystem or something like that, can you turn that into a force and a flywheel? And I think they've taken something that was complicated and they turned it into their best asset ever, and they did it through this ecosystem flywheel of their user base. And so I just think they're really leveraging that trend. And I think it's just that's something I'm noticing more and more. Instead of someone talking to a salesperson, they want to talk to someone that's used a product, or they want to talk to someone internally at the company that uses their own product. And I think this is something that's going to continue because especially I think in just the age of AI we're in, people are more skeptical than ever, and they want that sort of grounded, practical, I've used this product perspective. And so I think that's where this ecosystem marketing trend comes from, and they've just capitalized on that so brilliantly.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. There's lots of pieces to dig into, but you mentioned in the age of AI, it doesn't take many seconds for a podcast episode to go by before AI comes up. It's just, that's the reality. No, don't apologize. That's the reality that we're living in. And the second piece of this, you talked about, you want to talk to a human about what's going on and how you're using the product. And I actually think that Clay, I don't know if it was conscious or not, but their whole brand ethos, even before they became big, was this folny little clay animation characters, right? It's always been that human from the very beginning. I think their founder is very, artsy, folksy from that perspective. So I think it's just, that's what they have been doing. And that's, I think, part of why they're having the success that they're having. It's probably part of the ethos, and that stands out. That's a good one. Have you seen their billboards? Are they doing billboards in Miami? Did you see them anywhere? Or
no, I haven't seen them.
Go check out. They've done some billboards. It's something like in the Bay Area. There's one that says something like Michelangelo had blah blah blah, and go to market has clay. They're trying to draw that comparison of this is the surface on which you will do your best work, and it's pretty good. I like it. Okay.
I love what you said. I think that ties into how the visual brand can embody the internal ethos of the company, and their visual brand does that. It's this very unique approach in a sea of gradients and, all the other design trends that are out there. They're taking a very different path, and it's very raw and human feeling and has a bit of edge and humor to it. And so I think that all ties together really well.
Yeah. That actually made me think about Kanji, because I was like, you all have a B, if I'm not wrong.
Correct. Yeah.
I hadn't looked at your brand in months. So the fact that I remembered that is pretty cool. Was that a conscious choice? I'm going off script here, but tell me about the Kanji brand, because you were employee 4, 5, is that right?
Number
So
4.
you've seen it kind of grow from the very early days. Tell us about how you made that happen at Kanji, or was that, before you even showed up?
Yeah, it's so interesting. The bee concept was there before I showed up, actually, but it certainly came to life and, we massaged it and refined it and simplified it a little bit. But I think that's so spot on. The bee is one of the most memorable parts of the brand. And it does have a story behind it. The concept is that because we manage and secure Apple devices. So any company that uses Apple devices use us. And the concept of the bee is that the queen bee sort of governs this hive the same way that Kanji governs this fleet of devices that are out there in the world helping people do their work. And so there is a very good story behind it. But I think even outside of the story, it's just a very lovable icon. And our customers will actually bang down the door for swag with the logo on it. Right. Because they love it so much. It's just created this connection with people. And I think that is the component of the brand that has that connection and that sort of love from customers, especially. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's also just very memorable because it has this iconic, presence to it. And so I think any brand that has, a component of the brand doesn't have to be the logo. It could be anything, but something like that people can connect with that ideally has a story behind it, I think is really powerful.
No, it's great. We're trying to do something like that. I knew that when we started Paramark, we needed some symbol to represent it. So we have Athena, which is the goddess of vision, I think, or of sight. So you can kind of see far. That's the whole idea behind Paramark's Athena. I think we have some work to do to make that really apparent and bold, but we're working on it. Okay, so with that, you recently, and I was following you on LinkedIn, where you posted about what's the Shark Tank? Did you do an internal Shark Tank? That's what I remember. And the idea is awesome. We actually tried to make a Shark Tank set of videos about Paramark. So it's great minds think alike. Tell us about the story behind that. What were you trying to achieve with the internal Shark Tank? And then I'll have a bunch of questions for you.
Yeah, it was one of the most fun days that we had as a team, first of all. So I think that's really important. I think with so much changing in the world, it's easy to be afraid. And I think there's a lot of fear out there right now. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of fear. And the best ideas don't come out of that mindset. So I wanted to create a space where I was like, can I gamify this? Can I make it fun? Can I create a space where there's no rules. We can step out of the day-to-day and play this game where anything is possible. And I believe the best ideas come to the forefront when you can kind of set aside the pressure for a moment, and making it a game just takes the pressure off a little bit and creates the sense of competition, but it's not within the constraints of the day-to-day. And so that's how it came about, because I wanted to drive even more AI transformation on the team. We've done a lot of great work so far, but there's so much more we could do. I also wanted to just kind of set the tone for how the brand is going to show up in terms of how the world is changing. I have a lot of thoughts on that too, but I think it's more important than ever for brands to be human, to have a spark, to have a soul to them, to have something a little edgy and different. And I felt like we had been very polished and very helpful, and I just don't think that's enough anymore. I think anything that can be replicated by AI is not going to be valuable in the future. And so I wanted to create a space where we could push that a little further and bring a bit more personality over polish to the brand. And so that's what I wanted to bring to the forefront. And I didn't want to show up and have all the ideas. The team has way better ideas than I do. And so I just wanted to create a space where they could do that. And then we could also weave in AI and make that part of the pitches as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. So when you say the brand is helpful, but maybe a little too polished, and you're trying to insert more personality, tell me about the why. Because you kind of talked about it. You said with all the stuff that's happening in AI, it's very easy to copy, it's very easy to replicate. Is it though? Is it real? Can a new upstart come about and kind of say the same things that Kanji is saying? Like, tell me about what's really driving that need for more personality.
Yeah, I think from where I was sitting, it felt like, polished content, helpful content, a brand that was polished and helpful. Like, I just feel like AI can create those things. And you see new startups coming on the scene every day that are able to achieve a very high level of polish and scale and can ship a lot of content. And maybe a good example is I have talked to, other folks, how are you using AI? And I talked to a CMO recently that was like, oh, we went from 3 blog posts a month to 5. And it's like, why? And if everyone is doing that, then, and that's not necessarily bad, but like everyone is doing that, are we not just commoditizing those things? And so I felt that the things that would be valuable in the future were the things that were either the most human, so like personal lived experiences, or lessons learned, stories, or that spark of personality that has this edge to it that I heard it said once that AI like smooths out the wrinkles. It smooths out the wrinkles in your writing. It smooths out the wrinkles. And I thought that was so well said because it's like the wrinkles are going to be what's most valuable. They're going to be what everyone's searching for to tell themselves, like, is this real? And so, yeah, maybe I felt like we needed more wrinkles.
I like this.
Oh, this is spark. Like, and it wasn't necessarily, that something was wrong or broken. It was just that I was seeing where the world was going, and I wanted to capitalize and make space for those things that are going to be valuable. And I just felt like those things that are commoditized are just going to be not good enough anymore because everyone's just going to be doing more of them. Everyone's going to be doing 3 blogs a month or 5 instead of 3. And so I wanted to get ahead of that commoditization of something that we had done well in the past, but may not be good enough in the future.
Right. And this is interesting, right? So you're operating from a position of strength because you've had all this success behind you. You've done a whole bunch of great stuff in marketing with this brand. You've seen the brand grow from 4 people to hundreds or thousands of people now. Was it a hard conversation with your peers in the C-suite to talk about, hey, we need to change something? And weren't they like, wasn't your CEO or CFO like, well, it's been fine. Why are we changing what's been working up until now? Or was it a relatively easy conversation? I'm curious what that dynamic was like.
Yeah, it was actually a very easy conversation. Like everyone, I think, everyone's looking for AI transformation. Everyone's looking for like, what are the big ideas that are going to continue to drive the hockey stick growth that we all want? And so I think it would be, it's a hard thing to say no to, right? We're going to pitch you a bunch of really cool ideas and we're going to weave AI into all of them. I doubt any leadership team would be opposed to that, right? So that part of the conversation was not difficult at all. Part of that conversation was talking about the future challenges based on how buyer behavior is changing. And so an example is just channels. So like, in SEO, Google search, outbound, these are channels that companies, including us, have relied on for a very long time. I see major risks with all those channels. So that was part of that conversation too. It wasn't just like, hey, I had this idea, we'll pitch some ideas. The conversation was more like, hey, these are channels that may be at risk in the future, and we need to find other plays to make. And so it was bigger than just brand. It was also about growth. It was about how do we find different things to invest in that are going to make sure that we're going to continue to drive growth if these channels that are at risk start to not perform as well. And yeah, a lot of people search on an LLM instead of Google. Or if they do search on Google, they just read the Gemini search result and everything else is pushed to the bottom. So these things are real changes that are happening. And if we don't find interesting new ways to drive growth and bring the brand to life, then we are in the future going to fall behind. And we need to recognize that now. So that was part of the conversation too, is 2 parts. It was like, here's the risks, and then here's the opportunity that we have, and here's a chance to get a bunch of great ideas. And nobody was opposed to that at all.
All right. Well, tell me about what idea won in the intro track. Did you come up with like a few that you want to give shout outs to your team or somebody else? Yeah.
So the idea that won overall, we had different categories. The idea that won overall was actually video skits. which may surprise. I mean, it's not like an AI forward idea necessarily, but there's other companies, just other examples in B2B actually that have done this well. It is far less common in B2B marketing than other B2C marketing. But the idea with video skits is like, can you create something that's shareable? Can you create something that's an inside joke? Where if you send this, we sell to IT and security leaders that manage Apple devices, right? So if you send them something that they're like, wow, these people get me, and they think it's hilarious, then they're going to share it, right? So it's like, instead of investing dollars or resources into the distribution of every single eyeball that sees that content, can you create something that that has a bit of virality built into it? And then can you create it in such a way, and this pitch won partly because it was just extremely well presented, of course. It's just like a really fun idea that we could do a lot with. But it's also just, like, you have to do that really well. If you're going to do it, it has to be this inside joke with your buyer that like they're the only ones that will get it. And so to make that succeed, you really have to understand the buyer really, really well. Understanding their humor is like one of the deepest forms of knowing your buyer. And this is honestly one of my big sort of gripes with all the AI hype out there is like everyone's building all this AI stuff and they're like obsessed with automating their process. But like, is anyone thinking about the customer and making their experience exceptional? Like I hear a lot more stories about people just, increasing volume of something that they were doing before or just accelerating an old playbook they used to do before. But how many people are really using AI to really understand their buyer really well, or using AI to be able to deliver some new or exceptional experience to the buyer? And so that's what I loved about that idea, is it was so grounded in like, we understand our buyers so well that we understand their humor and we'll create something that's viral to them.
I mean, if you can make somebody laugh, you can probably make them buy something too, right? It's like, that's the humor is the ultimate currency of trust building, right? Like you're sitting around and you have a laugh together, that immediately creates that connection. And I think B2B sometimes can forget about it. Or, honestly, it's not even if you forget about it, it's just hard. Comedy is very hard.
Yep.
So, doing that in an environment, like you said, if you're helpful and you're polished and now you're suddenly switching gears and, doing comedy, that's going to take some vulnerability and some iteration. So, that's interesting. Okay. So you talked a lot about the customer and the insight that you have sort of about your customer and that inside joke or the inside, thing that's going to get to that connection. You also talked about this idea of a single galvanizing narrative. Is that, maybe it comes easier to you? I'm answering my question before I even ask you the question. Maybe it comes easier to you because you were with the company very early on, right? So you kind of have seen that sort of, the whole story come to life. But when you were writing that narrative, was that scary as a CMO, or, not being like, instead of like the CEO writing it or, the co-founder writing it? Like, tell me about that. Was it exciting, nervous? Like, how did you go about it?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it does help that I've been here for so long. Like in the early days, I was on every single sales call with our now CRO and our CEO, and we're all in the room. And so I have this sort of grounded knowledge of the customer that I think is really difficult to achieve if you come in much later in the company. And there's ways you can get there, but it's harder, right? And I've just been so close to this audience. And so I don't think writing that narrative is intimidating at all if you understand them really well, because all you have to capture is the pain that they're dealing with and your vision for the future without that pain or reducing it or helping that somehow. And you really have to understand where they are in their world, what they're struggling with, then also what's changing in their world, and how those changes in the world are part of why this solution makes sense. And I think it's very rooted. I certainly think like founder, CEO, whoever it is, if you're writing a narrative like this, like they absolutely need to be involved, because it's it has to be an encapsulation of the vision. And so it's certainly not something that marketing can just make up and write, right? Like it has to be very grounded in that. But I do think it's much easier when you understand that buyer so well, their world and what's changing in it, then you can write it for that pain that they're experiencing. And then you just capture the vision of what you're creating, what you believe about the world, what's changing. And so I think it's just a matter of putting those two pieces together, connecting the vision to that lived experience of the buyer.
Now, you said something interesting, right? Even in the early days, you were on those sales conversations. You were talking to the customer all the time. And I tell this I was a former VP of marketing before I, started this company. And I tell every marketer that if you're not talking to customers, you shouldn't call yourself a marketer. And sometimes people look at me with like, well, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to talk to customers? Like, they're everywhere if you just go looking for them. And so I'm curious, do you do something within your teams to inculcate that type of a, ownership within your marketers to like encourage them to go spend time with customers? Or what are the, other things that you've experimented with and getting that knowledge, not just in your head, but all of your team members' heads? I'm curious how that's played out.
Yeah, well, one of the ideas that came out of the Shark Tank date, we haven't done this yet, but it's one I'm really excited about. And I can also speak to what we've done. But one of the ideas was creating a digital twin of our buyer personas. So like we all know the classic buyer persona doc that like is dead and was buried somewhere at Google Drive and no one's like looked at it in a year. And so we wanted to create sort of like a living version of that buyer persona that was constantly being enriched by all of the conversations and information we might be having with them. And can that be something we can actually interact with and ask it questions and maybe be like, I wrote this email, what do you think? And so I think that's a very interesting way to use AI, not just to like accelerate some old playbook, but actually bring you closer to the buyer. So we're still very early, but I thought that was a really cool idea that one of my team members pitched. And a couple other things that we have done. So we do a regular session with, and product marketing helps us drive this, but we will sometimes watch recorded sales calls together as a team. And then we'll like pause it every 10 seconds and be like, oh, did you hear they said this thing? Or they used that word? Or, they, talked about the problem that they're dealing with in a certain way. And so that's a fun way to like, I don't think it really works if you're just like, okay, everyone listen to 5, recorded calls a week. It doesn't really work. But if you do it as a group, we get so much out of those sessions. We also will sometimes do sessions with folks internally, like our internal IT team, and we'll see how they're doing things internally. So that helps too. And another thing we've done actually is surveys. So part of our brand, marketing efforts right now are we have a media site. We publish a lot of different content streams, but one of our content streams is research. And so we will just send surveys about various different topics. We usually do one every month. And that's a really cool one too. We always put in an open text field of like, want to add anything else? And sometimes some of the most interesting learnings come out of what people actually write in that open text field. So it's great because it creates great content, but it's also great because we learn a lot from it. And so that's been a really cool thing that has helped bring us closer to the buyer in a more macro sense of trends or, what's the top challenge versus the next ones. I think you need both. You need sort of the bird's eye view of what they're experiencing that we get through the surveys. And then you need that one-to-one, like we're sitting listening to a call and we're kind of breaking it down and talking about it.
Well, if there's any marketers who are listening to this, like those 3 tips, I'm going to repeat them because they were so good. A digital twin of your buyer persona, right? And whether you hate or love the idea of a buyer persona, but the concept of, hey, this is a virtual representation of somebody who might actually be a buyer. The second was, I love the idea of watching film together, right? It's like sports teams again, and doing it together sort of adds that little bit of, the connecting the dots between different things. And the third being this survey-led approach for, new ideas, but also, like you said, you already have that opportunity because you're doing it for another purpose, right? Which is the content, and you're learning, using that as a way to learn from the people that you're surveying. This is great. Our team is relatively small, so the watching film is just Sam and myself. Sam is our VP of marketing, and he's great, and he's always asking me for calls to record anyway. So it's great. All right. So on this note, we talked about this idea that you are sort of creating this, personality for the brand. You're all sort of very focused on the customer narrative and the story and the pain points and learning about that. And you also mentioned in this manifesto of yours that you're going to do something different about how you measure the creative that you're putting out. Talk to me about how that transition is going to happen. What were you doing before, and what are you going to do differently going forward with this new sort of perspective that you have?
Yeah, such an important point. This is probably a topic near and dear to your heart, obviously. Attribution has been like love-hate relationship.
I did not say the word attribution, just to clear the right.
No, but honestly, was a very big part of this whole transformation and, brand that I wanted to create. And I think it's more important than ever to approach attribution differently than in the past, because so much is changing. A lot of how folks find us is even less trackable than it was before. So that makes it even more challenging. And so what we did, we actually didn't change any part of our current attribution system. We have an attribution system, but we just layered on top of that with a new source of information. So we're kind of in curiosity stage right now. And the big question that I, started to ask myself was, there's all of these touch points with the brand that are never going to show up on a dashboard somewhere. So that was kind of like problem number one. There's a lot of things that are just untrackable. Like we have a podcast called Patch Me If You Can. Somebody listens to that. That's never going to show up on any touch point. If someone talks to a call, this happens all the time. We get folks that want to buy Kanji that because they talked to someone else that used it. Happens all the time. And that's never going to show up either. So, and of course there's ways to make those things more trackable. But what we launched, this was our curiosity experiment, was just a simple how did you hear about us? Open text, optional field. And so this was just a step in the right direction for us. Because the question I was really asking myself was, are we approaching with curiosity, how people actually find us? And I think attribution is one of the most challenging things for marketing because it's so tied to credit. It's so tied to, does this money that this, this team spent on this thing, are they going to get credit for that thing? Or, this person did this effort, are they going to get credit for it? Are they going to get budget for it next year? And so I think it just becomes a bit politicized, and that muddies the waters of just that open curious question of how do people find us? And so I wanted to just try to get as raw as possible. So it's very rudimentary, of course, but it's just sort of, I would call it just a curiosity experiment of what if we just ask people? Yeah. And we didn't try to get them to choose from a set of options or something, just open, optional, what if we just asked? And so that's been fascinating, but we're still super early in that. But I think that was important as it relates to this Shark Tank and the brand effort, because if we're going to really invest in making the brand unmistakable, and then you have no way to measure that, then that feels like a failed experiment, or it feels like there has to be some change we're driving there. And so that's where that came from. So I have many other ideas about how we can improve that, take it to the next level in the future. But I think it is just really challenging to manage brand with a lot of the current systems that are out there.
No, that is precisely the challenge that I find a lot of B2B brands get to, where you want to make this big brand push, right? Talk about the story, the personality, and put something very distinctive out there. And if you don't have the right measurement in place before you do that, like you said, it looks like it didn't work, even though it's very possible that it was working, but it just was not visible to the naked eye on a dashboard, right? Because it wasn't sort of lifting it in a way where you were able to get clear signals. All right, we'll talk about that another time, because I have lots of ideas and thoughts on what you can do in a fairly sort of, DIY fashion to make that work sort of really successful internally. But I want to sort of maybe change gears and talk about a different topic. Again, going off the script. I was at a conference 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks ago, and I was talking to this really accomplished CMO. We were coming back from the gondola ride. This was Highline by User Evidence. It was great. And not going to reveal who it was, but I was just getting to know that person. And I asked him hey, are you having fun with your job? And he's like, yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. I think I'm going to be, out of a job in 18 months, but I'm having a lot of fun. And I was like, wait, what, how did we go from I'm having a lot of fun to I'm going to be out of job in 18 months. Like, what's going on? And he's like, well, that's the usual pattern, right? CMOs come in and 18 months or 2 years, whatever the average tenure is. And, you're out the door, and then you have a new person and you go find your next gig. And this is somebody who's, a veteran of the industry, right? They've been at the large Fortune 500, amazing SaaS companies and, been there for like 7 years, 10 years, right? Lots of experience. I'm curious why, and this is not an uncommon thing. I promise I will come to a question. You've had the opposite experience, right? You've been at Kanji for a while, for a long time. Why do you think there's this dysfunction in the CMO sort of circles where even some of the best people out there are somehow sort of finding themselves in the situation where 18 months, 2 years in, there's a default assumption that, I'm going to be out of a job and there's going to be a next one. And it's like normalized. Like, it's so wild to me. Like, I'm just curious what you think about this whole thing.
Yeah, that's an incredible question. It's funny. I had a CMO mentor back in the day who I also will not name, but they told me, they were like, if you do well, they replace you. And if you don't do well, they replace you.
Oh my God.
And I was like, whoa, and so I think that's absolutely true. And I think that the dysfunction is more, systemic than any individual to your point. But I think part of I don't know, I see two things are coming to mind. One is that I think a lot of senior leaders come into companies and they want to make their mark. And so they just change a bunch of things. They want to do a rebrand. They want to change the messaging. They want to change, something because they want to like prove that they can make their mark. And, that may be in an effort to, change that trend and be able to still have a job. But I think oftentimes it backfires because you're changing something from a place of, I need to make my name known here, so I need to change something. And it's not from this place that's rooted in, the understanding the buyer really well. And I think a lot of folks, I've seen this, over and over again, where you think you can just sort of copy the playbook from a previous era or a previous company or a previous whatever. And you can just be like, oh, I know the playbook. I'm just going to come in here, run the playbook. But I think I have this philosophy that proximity is more important than playbooks, where proximity in terms of proximity to the buyer and really understanding that universe and that community and how they think and how they operate, I think is so much more important than any playbook that you've run in the past that's worked really well, because it's just, may not work. The buyer might be totally different. The industry might be different. The ACV might be different. Anything might be different that might make that fail. And so I think a lot of folks come in just wanting to make their mark out of a place of, wanting to be known versus wanting to really understand what's going to resonate with that buyer. And this is another part of the Shark Tank thing that was really important to me, was that the sharks were all representative of our buyer personas. Oh. And so they were people internally that had like sat in that seat and done that job. And I told them all, I was like, today you don't work at Kanji. You are our buyer persona. Stay in character. Some of them did better than others, stay in character, but that's important to me because like who cares what I think? Who cares what the executive team thinks? Like, you should do what's going to land with the buyer. So I think that's something, that contributes to that. But I think the other thing that probably contributes to that is that, I think leadership in general doesn't understand marketing, doesn't understand how to, make those investments in a way that's going to pay off in the long term. And I think a lot of folks are looking for like, that short-term pipeline boost, which obviously if there's low-hanging fruit and you can achieve some of that, great. But it's funny, I was at the Exit 5, Dave Gerhardt's conference last week, and Ryan Holiday spoke, who writes the Daily Stoic. Oh. He's written it for like 14 years. He's recorded a Daily Stoic podcast episode every single day. So his talk was about the idea of like creating something that lasts and creating something that compounds. And I thought that was so powerful because similar to how you can either pay for an ad that then disappears as soon as you stop paying for it, or you can invest in a content flywheel or community flywheel that's good to compound and live on and build upon itself. And I think oftentimes it's tempting to get that short-term pipeline boost, but then you ultimately kind of stab yourself in the foot by missing out on something that really compounds. But it's tough because, if you especially if you've been in the industry a while and you're kind of expecting to have a short shelf life, then do you have the luxury of investing in the thing that's going to compound? Like, maybe you don't.
Maybe you don't. I think those were incredible points. I completely agree with both. I'll add a third. I think what I'm realizing is that the expectation that leadership has when they hire a marketing leader, a new marketing leader, is somehow that is going to change the fundamental reality of your business. And the reality of the business is going this way, right? If the chart is going this way and you expect somebody to come in and do a Hail Mary and for the chart to go this way, right? It's like, I'm sorry, like that doesn't work, right? That doesn't happen overnight. And that doesn't happen by hiring a CMO who, let's be honest, has a fairly limited amount of, responsibility and accountability within the organization. Yeah. Gone are the days of the 4 Ps, right? Like, let's just talk about promotion, right? We're not talking about product and, pricing and placement. Maybe we are, but like not really. And so I think there is also that element of just there's mismatched expectations of what it takes to go from here to here and what you're asking the CMO to come in and do. But I'm reflecting on that topic these days. It's an interesting one for me. Okay, looking back, so you've had this incredible run. We have a lot of listeners who are early career, who maybe are responsible for one part of marketing and are thinking about how to grow to the next level of their career. They might be a head of paid media, or they might be head of content, or they might be head of product marketing. And you've kind of done all of those roles, I imagine, because you've had this sort of long trajectory at Kanji. If you could go back in time and tell yourself about, hey, there's this one thing that I would recommend you do to have an even stronger grasp of the marketing function, what is that one thing that you would tell your younger self or earlier career self?
I can think of like 20 things, but I'll pick one thing. What I would say is that I waited too long to really build brand community. And I call it like building for the 95%. So this concept that like 5% of people are in market at any given time, 95% are not. And you can start by targeting that 5%, but ultimately you're going to hit a ceiling with that group. And you can try to capture that demand as efficiently as possible. And that's great. And you should do that. But I do think that the, greater opportunities come from really targeting that 95%. And we did some things in the early days, again, more in like helpful content landscape to target that 95%. But I would absolutely start much sooner in building brand and community and specifically targeting that 95%. Because it takes so much time. You don't really have the luxury of doing it when you're under the gun if you have to do it. And so you have to do it earlier than you think you need to in order to be able to continue to grow at as much of an efficient place as possible. And I think we would be more efficient now if we had invested more in the 95% earlier. Because I think we over-indexed on the 5% and done really well with that group. But I think, and then community building, I think, is just one of those things where a lot of people think, oh, we'll do a user conference when we have like 10,000 customers. But you don't need to wait that long. It doesn't need to be big. It's actually better. Every, Dreamforce didn't start at 100,000 people on day one. And I think you can start with a very, very small community efforts and then let those grow over time. And I think that's actually easier than trying to wait till you have 10,000 customers and then starting. And so, we've done some community stuff as well. But I think in terms of, we don't have an annual user conference or anything like that. I think that's something if you start early and just you're okay with it being small, I think that's better because then it compounds over time versus, waiting to start later.
Oh, that's a great one. I was literally having this conversation with one of my team members. It's like, once we get to 100 customers, we're going to host our first user conference.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a nice, number, and we can probably fly everybody in. Like, it'll be a great party, right? Imagine like getting together with like the first 100 customers. That sounds, so I love your idea. This is great. Last question before I let you go. So we ask everybody this question. If there is absolutely one experiment that you could run and you wanted to run right now in marketing, what would it be and why?
If I could run one experiment, it would be something along the lines of, like, I would want my team to do a bunch of other jobs for a period of time. And I can't do this because they have jobs they need to do, right? So I don't have the luxury. But I would love for them to do IT's job, do security's job, like basically like apprentice under the roles of the personas that we serve. Because I think there's no replacement for, hands-on having done the job. And I think that would just give them so much perspective. And another job I would want them to do is I basically do like a rotational program, do IT for a time, do security for a time, and then sales. I think it would be fascinating to have them do, and myself included, I'll include myself in this experiment as well. Yeah, have them do sales and then customer success. I think the rotational program of doing those different jobs would just give them such perspective, and they would come back with even more ideas about how to impact the entire funnel and reach the buyer in a way that really lands.
That sounds like a great idea. So I hope you get a little bit of breathing room to implement such a rotation program, because I think it's actually kind of cool, right? And if you think about larger companies who get to that stage, many of them have these rotational programs for that precise reason, right? You hire these like young, really smart people, you put them through this rotation program, they go work in marketing and sales and product and finance, and they come back to sort of one team, and that levels up their understanding of the whole business. Makes complete sense. But I can imagine why it's hard at a startup where they all have full-time jobs and it's hard to send them on a secondment somewhere. Awesome. Well, Sylvia, this was fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation. Question for you. Do you write online? Do you sort of, talk about sort of your marketing lessons anywhere? Or are you more of a, I'm so busy, I'm not doing any of that online type of CMOs, which is completely fine. There's many great CMOs who don't do that.
I actually have been started. So I started posting on LinkedIn really about 3-4 months ago. And so I share a lot of this stuff on there. I shared about the Shark Tank. I shared about other just like LLM optimization lessons that we've learned, philosophies and trends that I'm seeing. So yeah, absolutely follow me on LinkedIn. I love being able to just share these ideas as they come. And community honestly has been such an important part of my career and is even more recently. And that's something I would tell my younger self, like get more plugged in sooner, because it's so helpful to be able to just learn from other people that are really doing the work and learning as they go. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to LinkedIn, is almost like a sense of community where it's like, I tried this thing, or I learned this thing, or I'm chewing on this thought. And so I kind of use it for that. And it helps me really clarify my beliefs and my thoughts, actually being, writing on there. So
Writing is a fantastic way of doing exactly that. So love it. Go find Sylvia LePoidevin. I hope I got that right. On LinkedIn, and check out all of her thoughts on all of the things that we just talked about. Sylvia, thank you so much for doing this. This was fantastic. I came away with very clear lessons for myself and my team. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, appreciate it so much. Thanks for the just incredible questions. A great conversation.
All right, folks, that was Sylvia LePoidevin. I would highly recommend you give her a follow on LinkedIn, and tune in again next week for another episode of Brandformance.